Just a reminder, I am out of town next week and nobody volunteered to be my substitute, so we will pick this up in 2 weeks. Yeah, Bill has a meeting and he will try to slip in late. He is preaching for me on Sunday, so be gentle.
He said he couldn't do that.
Yeah.
Said you interrupted him too many times last time.
He said I so abused him last time he wasn't coming today. But he's got a property committee thing to which he is attending on our behalf. So, yes, as is Ken, as is Howard Newton, so good group. Once again, thank you, those of you who are attending over our YouTube videos. Glad that you are watching us as well. Feel encouraged to leave any questions you have in the comments, and I will jump those in as well. I want to begin this week, like I do each week, with the best question from last week. And the best question from last week was, some of our translations say, deliver us from the evil one instead of from evil. So what's right? What does that mean? And y'all asked me to go do a little bit of work. So I got out my Greek New Testament, which is ironically titled in Latin, Novum Testamentum Graece. But I went and looked at my Greek New Testament to look at it. And where's a marker? So the Greek there you can see in front of you. And I have misspelled it in your handout because I couldn't figure out how to do the accent marks. That's not right. So the words are, those of you who were in fraternities or majored in math might recognize these letters. Apo, two, no, yeah. Apo to, or Appa to Paneru is the Greek there. And this is from the evil. That would be the most wooden, literal, basic Greek student translation, which is what I'm qualified to share. So with that, sometimes when we have this definite article and then an adjective, it can be a stand-in for the evil one. Like we would say, blessed are the meek ones. Blessed are the those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, all that stuff. Generally, you have this kind of what's called a substantive use of an adjective, where it is a substance, where we take the adjective, evil, and have it be a substance. As I was looking through my Greek resources, which I keep around for times such as this, this is... So word order only kind of matters in Greek. It's not like English where the boy kicked the ball and the ball kicked the boy are two very different sentences. In Greek, the word order can change without changing the meaning if you want to poetically emphasize something, which is kind of cool. So they instead changed the endings of the words to indicate where it should go in an English sentence. And this to Paneru is what's called the genitive case. You don't have to remember that. It won't be on the test. But it tends to mean of or from, and this preposition helps us know that this is from. Remember, deliver us from, or save us, or rescue us from the evil. And this could be two different words that has been adapted to fit this. It could be, and you can see this in your handout, paneros, which is evil one, that is the noun, or it could be paneron, which is more of the concept of evil as a force. One is the kind of personified and the other is a little more, and there's no way to tell from the Greek which is which. So either one could be correct. From what I've seen, it is probably more correct in the Greek to say from the evil one. That is probably more correct. However, That is the academic answer. The traditional answer is, I'm Presbyterian, I don't want to change. I've been saying, deliver us from evil forever, and why would I change now? I will continue to say, deliver us from evil when I lead worship until such time as the session says, we'd like a more updated translation, which is not likely to happen. But the Greek probably means the evil one in the context of this Matthew passage. Yeah. That was the question last week. I did some research. Y'all, the person who asked that question, and you know who you are, definitely nerd sniped me on that. And I got into the weeds a little bit and had a lot of fun dusting off my Greek New Testament and some of the other resources I've got. So, moving on from there, we're going to get into a review. Last time we did the Lord's Prayer. We had some fun with it. We had somebody else on camera, and I interrupted him a lot. So not much to review of that. We all probably can say the Lord's Prayer by heart, even though we might say it in ways that are not correct according to the best Greek resources that we have. We all know that one. The things that I want to remind us of and emphasize is the emphasis in the Lord's Prayer on the kingdom of God as opposed to the kingdoms of this world is very important to Jesus' mission and very important to what we will see in the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. The other is the emphasis on communal discipleship. It's not my Father who art in heaven, it's our Father who art in heaven. And so doing this as a community and in groups, that is the faithful way to do faith, is with one another. So with that, that's our review of the Lord's Prayer. And we're going to jump right in. The microphone may not have picked me up as well as I was turned around. We're going to jump right in at Matthew 6:19. We had previously done the verses before that a couple of weeks ago because I wanted to handle the Lord's Prayer all on its own. And so we had done a lesson on personal piety a few weeks ago. And now we're picking up where we left off from that. And we're going to jump in with verse 19. One of the commentaries that I looked at in preparation for this today did not mention during the other one for that. Jesus here is going through a list of things that can distract us from seeking the kingdom of God. And from being the kind of people who were lifted up in Matthew 5 in the Beatitudes. So the first set of distractions that they lifted up is personal piety, those religious practices that we do. Our religious practices can be a distraction from pursuit of the kingdom of God. If you are doing it for its own sake rather than doing it because it brings you closer to God, you've kind of fallen off track. The next one that gets lifted up is where we are here in verse 19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust, and I have a footnote here that rust can be eating, consume, and where thieves break in and steal. Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust consumes and where thieves do not break in and steal. That's, I think, a really difficult. We had talked about the do good to those who hurt you as something that is difficult to follow. We talked about that weeks ago. This one might be even more difficult to follow than that. He says, looking at a room of lots of people who have retirement accounts. And I've got one too. So am I storing up treasures for myself on earth? Yeah, probably. And that will follow along further with what we talked about last week with the give us this day our daily bread. I have bread stored up for some time after I turn 67, and probably much later than that in reality. I've got bread for that day. But the prayer we are taught is give us this day our daily bread. Jesus is highlighting here, and we see this in these two verses, 19 and 20, the impermanence, the the fact that they are never something on which we can fully rely of those earthly treasures. Certainly, just a few months ago, my family members who live in the mountains of North Carolina had a hurricane come visit them. Hurricanes are not something you normally think of in the mountains of North Carolina. That's a problem for my family that's in Charleston or Myrtle Beach. But it came and visited Western North Carolina, and all those houses that were built on rock rolled down that rock into the valleys below. So even the things that are done correctly with appropriate attentiveness to risk factors and things like that, because if you live on the side of a mountain, you don't think of flood insurance as something you're going to need because the water's going to roll downhill. Unfortunately, the reality is sometimes a hurricane comes to Western North Carolina and your house is one of the things that rolls down the hill. Within the last 2 weeks, I-40 has reopened with one lane in each direction between North Carolina and Tennessee. So that's happened in the last 2 weeks, and the people I know in Tennessee and North Carolina are very excited about that. Any wealth, any treasure, any valuables that we accrue on earth is temporary. It is not something on which we can fully rely, even in the best of times. The stock market can crash. The housing market can bottom out. I was in college getting student loans and looking for a job in 2008, 2009. So I lived through that in a real front row seat kind of way. And all of y'all probably watched that happen with a different set of anxieties. Those kind of things can evaporate very quickly. And if it can evaporate very quickly, maybe don't trust it to save you. Instead, put your treasure in heaven. Now, treasures in heaven is not a televangelist thing where if you send me money, I'll pray on your behalf and then you'll be in heaven. It's not a, what was it called? It's not an indulgence. I was going to say condolence, but that's not the same thing. It's not an indulgence where as soon as coin in coffer springs, the soul to heaven, as soon as coin in coffer rings, the soul to heaven springs. The indulgences that were intended to help your loved ones get through purgatory and into heaven more quickly, and also intended to help build St. Peter's Basilica. So it's not that. The treasures in heaven are a commonly used Jewish trope that appears in Jewish literature of this time for good deeds, for helping others, for a generosity of spirit. It appears in other languages of the other literature of the period, meaning that. And so treasure in heaven is not something that is original to Jesus. It's something his audience would have immediately said, oh yeah, I heard about that in the local play. I read about that in a scroll that that somebody loaned me or something like that. I would say from a Christian perspective, when we are talking about treasures in heaven, we should turn back to Matthew chapter 5, verses 3 through 12. Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Store up for yourselves treasure in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. I would make the argument that when Jesus says treasures in heaven, he is invoking those other contemporary literary ideas, but he's pointing more directly towards, I told you earlier in this sermon what counts as treasure. And it's not your weekly tithes and offerings, although, for the record, please don't stop giving those. But that's not your treasure in heaven. Your treasure in heaven is a life that is lived fully trusting the kingdom of God rather than fully trusting what we can earn through our own labor or our own investment or things like that. So, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Certainly that's kind of a self-explanatory proverb to me. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your valuables are. I think about Emerald Hill Elementary School a whole bunch because that's where my valuable is right now. That's William. I think about my home because it's, I paid a lot of money for it, but also it's where Leah is right now. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The kind of people who, and I do this sometimes when I get anxious, compulsively check their online bank account or their investment portfolios. They're showing where their heart is. It's what they are concerned about because that's where they have put their valuables. That's not a judgment on Jesus' part. That is an observation. The judgment is in verse 19 and 20 saying, don't do this, do that instead. So, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The things that we value are where we put our attention and our time. All right. Serving two masters.
Healthy eyes.
I'm sorry? Oh, healthy eyes. Yes, I'm sorry. If your eye causes you to sin, the eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is... I'm reading verse 22. The eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? This one requires a little bit more explanation. For one, it's not saying that ophthalmology can be a spiritual discipline. That's a joke. You can laugh at that. So he says, taking off his glasses, indicating the health of his own eyes. The lamp of the body language, we now, with modern understandings of optics and the anatomy of the eye, recognize that the eye is not the lamp, it's the window. It lets the eye in, and then it hits your retinas and translates into electrical impulses that go up your optic nerve and then interact with your brain neurons and all sorts of fun stuff. That's how it works. The light bounces off of you and hits me. But in the ancient world, they didn't have any kind of understanding of that. So they did understand a lamp helps me see, and my eye helps me see. This is what points the light of my attention, and that's how I understand it. So when Jesus says the eye is the lamp of the body, he is working from the understanding of how things worked from his time period, where the eye is what shines light on whatever you are paying attention to. So the rest of it, though, other than that image of the eye is the lamp of the body, does work pretty well with how we know things to work now. Because when the eye is healthy, our whole body is full of light. The light actually enters our body through our eyes, and our brain then interprets that. I would, and I do this in the handout, pointing out the previous indication that we had, or the previous teaching that we had on what causes you to sin. If your eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away, for it's better to use one of your members than your whole body to be thrown into hell. That is chapter 5, verse 29. We would say probably that when Jesus is talking about the eye in this passage, he's talking about our perceptions, which come from our mind more than they do from our eyes. He's doing some metaphoric language there. And so keeping your mind healthy and free of prejudices, and there was a list of these. I think it was in this commentary, but I could be wrong. It might be in the other one. No, it wasn't in this one. I grabbed the other one. Prejudices is one where we judge before we have really even seen, or judge on sight alone. Other ways that our eyes can be unhealthy is to be ungenerous, or resentful. Those are ways that our eyes can be unhealthy, because it takes the good things that are in our lives and reinterprets those in a way that, to use the language here, fills us with darkness. And to the extent that we can keep our mind, our eyes free of those kinds of burdens, we are able to live more into the kingdom of God and see that light which shines in the darkness, to borrow a phrase from John's Gospel. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Jesus saying that if that metaphor is pretty easy to interpret. The thing that counts as light is already darkness, and darkness is even more than that. When we start to have our minds, our eyes become unhealthy with those things and other things that may distract us from looking for God's kingdom, we end up seeing things in a much darker and harsher light from there. Now going on to serving two masters. Thank you for calling me on that, Bev. No one can serve masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. The Greek there is mammon, which is a Hebrew word that means wealth. But not every translation translates that. Some of them just transcribe it as written. Other translations will also say servant rather than slave. The Greek word there is slave. It is unambiguously slave. And it is a slave as understood in the ancient world, which is a little bit different than it was practiced on this continent. But the word there is slave. And it has the force of you have a master. You don't have a boss, you have a master. So as we are interpreting that, we should keep that context in mind as well. So I think of it in terms of the Joshua 24 passage, choose this day whom you will serve. Will you serve the God of the Amorites in whose land you are living, or the God of the Egyptians, or the gods of your forefathers from across the river? But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And Jesus here is laying out as an opposition to serving God, serving wealth. We live in a capitalist society. Wealth is the motivator for so many things. Somebody, I think it was on the mission trip a couple of years ago as we were having a Bible study, or maybe it was just we were sitting on the couches talking and waiting for dinner to be ready. Somebody mentioned that something that would be a social benefit was never going to happen until we figured out a way to make it profitable. And while that is perhaps accurate, that is an example of how our society often serves money. This quote, I think, is excellent. This is from Dr. Tom Long's commentary on Matthew for the Westminster Bible Companion. This has been an excellent resource. It is very readable. It does not go into Greek like I do. It just talks about it. So if you want a commentary on Matthew, this is one I would recommend as a first step. If a person sees life as a gift from God, a bountiful outpouring of God's providence, then that person is free to hold possessions with a light grasp and to be generous toward others. On the other hand, if life is seen as a competitive struggle between winners and losers over limited resources, then one is a slave to this struggle, and the only viable creed is, where's mine? He goes on, we'll talk about this in the first of my questions for y'all. God says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Wealth says, indulge yourself, you've earned it. There are two masters, but only one servant. Living the good life and living a good life pull in opposite directions. One cannot serve both God and wealth. I really thought that was well put. Dr. Long is a really good writer. Yeah, so in serving two masters, we do have this push and pull as people who do not live fully in the kingdom of God yet. We've talked in this class a lot about realized eschatology. The kingdom of God is real and among us already. You look for the ways that it's breaking through into our reality. Our reality is still stained by sin, and sometimes it's hard to see. And one of the ways we can see that is the number of people around us, and sometimes who are us. I make decisions based on money sometimes. One of the things that I have said is, as a person who is paid to do ministry and to equip the saints for ministry, I'm not in it for the money, but my mortgage lender is. I'm not in it for the money, but the person who owns the grocery store is. So there is an extent to which, even as faithful Christians, we have to play the game of having money so we can do things. Jesus' disciples did have a treasurer among them. That went poorly, so it may not be the best example. But we also see giving alms to the poor, which Jesus mentions earlier in the Sermon on the Mount. That's not something you can do if you don't have anything to give. So Jesus is interacting with money. They are buying food. They are living off the generosity of others in some places, but they are interacting with goods and services and trades and economics and stuff like that. But is that a tool for their ministry, or is that the goal of their ministry? And I think with Jesus, we can obviously see the money is a tool to help them live in a society and do the ministry. It is not what they are serving. It is a tool. And that is how I think Christians should live in a Christ-like manner. That's probably a sliding scale depending on what kind of call and spiritual gift God has put on your own life. Not everyone is called to take a vow of poverty. And some people are and live very faithfully that way. Some people accrue enough to be able to share with others and to live generously in that way. It is not for me to judge. In fact, it seems like I read somewhere, judge not, lest ye be judged. That is what we're going to cover for today, 19 through 24, just 5 verses. It's pretty straightforward, but there's a lot in there. And a lot that impacts us as people who live in a capitalist society where competition, the exchange of money for goods and services, and the accrual of wealth are major parts of our society and our life together. So with that, I'm going to turn off the camera. Again, leave any questions or comments you may have in the comments down below, and we're going to have some discussion amongst ourselves.